A deserted Berlin street at midnight. Yellow streetlights casting pools of light on rain-slicked pavement. A scream tore through the night. "Let me go!" A woman struggled against a stranger's grip. I, Jonas, 36, single dad barely surviving, had just finished my taxi shift, happened to witness the attack. Without thinking, I charged forward, using my full body weight to tackle the assailant to the ground. When light fell on the woman's face, my heart stopped. She was the famous CEO from business news headlines. Everything was about to change for both of us. My name is Jonas Müller. At 36, I've learned that life doesn't care about your engineering degree when the company goes bankrupt and takes your career with it. 3 things define me: a lean frame from skipping meals so my daughter can eat, perpetually dark-circled eyes from driving taxi nights, and a worn coat I can't afford to replace. My shoes have holes I patch with cardboard. Not visible from outside, but I feel the cold sidewalk with every step. My 7-year-old daughter, Lena, is my reason for continuing. After her mother left us 3 years ago, Lena became everything: my purpose, my joy, my entire world compressed into 42 pounds of curiosity and trust. We rent a small flat in Kreuzberg, damp walls, heating that works when it feels like it, but it's ours. Every night, no matter how late I return from driving, I fold origami for Lena before she sleeps. Paper cranes, mostly. They cost nothing but mean everything to her. That particular midnight, I was walking home from returning my rental taxi, calculating whether I could afford both electricity and Lena's school supplies this month. The answer, as usual, was no to something. That's when I heard the scream. Instinct took over. Not heroic instinct, just the reflex of someone who'd learned that standing by while bad things happened made you complicit. A man in dark clothes had a woman pinned against a building wall, one hand over her mouth, the other gripping her arm hard enough to leave marks. A van idled nearby, engine running, back doors open. I didn't think about my own safety, about Lena needing her father. I just moved. The tackle was clumsy. I'm an engineer turned taxi driver, not an action hero. But momentum and surprise worked in my favor. The attacker went down hard, his head striking pavement with a sound that made me wince. He scrambled up and ran, probably realizing this kidnapping had become too complicated, too witnessed. The woman stood against the wall, breathing hard, expensive coat torn at the shoulder, one heel broken. "Are you hurt?" I asked in German, then switched to English when she didn't immediately respond. "Are you injured?" She looked at me with eyes that had just stared into an abyss and somehow climbed back out. No, I don't think so." Her voice was steadier than it should have been. "If you hadn't been here..." She didn't finish the sentence. We both knew how it would have ended. In the better light near the street, I recognized her. Klara Vogt, 32 years old, CEO of a tech company that had been making headlines for disrupting traditional German business culture. I'd seen her face on magazine covers at newspaper kiosks I couldn't afford to buy from. "We should call the police," I said. "No." Her response was immediate, almost panicked. "I mean, yes, but this is complicated. There are people who would use this against me." I understood, sort of. Rich people problems I couldn't fully comprehend, but I recognized fear regardless of tax bracket. "At least let me get you home safely." As we walked toward the main street to find a taxi, ironic, given I just parked mine, something fell from my coat pocket. A paper crane slightly crushed that Lena had made me carry for luck. It landed on the wet pavement between us, delicate wings absorbing rain. Klara picked it up carefully, studying it like it was something precious. "Your daughter made this?" she asked, somehow knowing. "How did you..." "The fold technique. Adult hands can make them perfect. Children make them hopeful." In my pocket, I felt the crumpled receipt from Lidl. Brought $1.99. Bread that would need to last 3 days. The contrast between her world and mine couldn't have been more obvious. But right now, on this rain-soaked Berlin street, we were just 2 people who'd survived something terrible together. I insisted on escorting Klara to her apartment, a penthouse in Mita with security that should have prevented what happened tonight. The security guard, she said as we rode the elevator. He called in sick. The replacement. I think he was part of it. Corporate kidnapping, industrial espionage made physical, the kind of thing I'd only seen in movies. Her apartment was exactly what I expected. Minimal, expensive, perfectly curated like a magazine spread. It felt less like a home than a very expensive hotel. Tea? She offered, her hand still trembling slightly as she filled a kettle. Sure. We sat in her pristine living room, both of us coming down from adrenaline, and an unlikely conversation began. You saved my life, she said, and I don't even know your name. Jonas Müller. What do you do, Jonas? The question wealthy people ask without realizing how loaded it is. I drive taxi nights. Days I look for engineering work that doesn't exist anymore. The honesty surprised me. Maybe the adrenaline made me careless. I have a daughter, 7. She's everything. Klara studied me, not with pity, but with something else. Recognition, maybe. You're probably wondering why a CEO was walking alone at midnight, she said. Your life, your choice. I was trying to prove something, that I could be normal. That success didn't have to mean paranoia and isolation. She laughed bitterly. Clearly, I was wrong. I noticed she kept looking at my shoes, at the visible wear of someone who couldn't afford to prioritize appearance. You're stronger than people I know with 10 times your resources, she said quietly. Poverty doesn't make you strong, it just makes you tired. The next morning I was making Lena breakfast, our usual bread and jam, stretched to seem like abundance, when someone knocked. Klara stood there holding bags from a bakery, looking uncertain. I wanted to thank you properly, she said. And I wanted to meet your daughter, the one who makes origami. Lena appeared at my side, eyes huge. Papa, is this the lady from TV? This is Klara, I said. She's a friend. Are you a princess? Lena asked with 7-year-old directness. Klara laughed, genuinely laughed, not the polite sound from business meetings. No, sweetheart. Just someone who's very grateful to your father. She sat on our worn couch without hesitation, and within minutes, Lena had her folding origami cranes. Like this? Klara asked, her business strategic hands suddenly clumsy with paper. Almost. You have to believe it will fly, Lena instructed seriously. I watched Klara in our shabby apartment, her expensive clothes completely out of place, folding paper with my daughter like it was the most important meeting of her day. The paper crane I dropped the night before sat on the table between us. Klara had kept it, smoothed it out, carried it here. This is important to you, I observed. It reminds me that delicate things can be strong, she replied. Lena, with characteristic lack of filter, asked, Do you have children? Klara's expression shifted, something painful crossing her features before she masked it. No, she said quietly, I don't. I changed the subject quickly, but not before seeing the loneliness in her eyes. All that success, all that power, and she was fundamentally alone. Later, as we cleaned up, Lena's transit ticket fell from her school bag. AB Tarif 320 Eur, smudged with pencil marks where she'd been drawing on the back. Klara picked it up, studying it like it was a document from another world, which I suppose it was. What's it like? She asked suddenly. Worrying about 3 euros? Constant, I said honestly. Every decision is math. Can we afford fruit this week? Will Lena's shoes last another month? Is the heating worth the cost, or should we just use more blankets? I've forgotten that, Klara said. Not forgotten, I never knew it. My adoptive father made sure I never experienced want. Adoptive? Heinrich Vogt took me from an orphanage when I was 10, made me his heir, his protege, his project. She smiled without humor. I've spent 22 years being grateful and obedient. Last night, I think someone connected to his business rivals decided that gratitude wasn't enough of a guarantee of loyalty. You think your father, not directly, but his business creates enemies, and I'm the obvious target. Softer, more vulnerable. Lena returned then, presenting Klara with a crane she'd perfected. This one's for you, for luck. Klara accepted it like it was made of gold. Tears she quickly blinked away, making her eyes bright. Thank you, she whispered to my daughter. I'll treasure it. After Klara left, Lena asked, "Is she lonely, Papa?" "Yes, sweetheart, I think she is." "Can she be our friend? Lonely people need friends." I looked at the origami crane Klara had left behind, placed carefully on our table like an offering or a promise. "Maybe she can," I said. Through our window, Berlin morning light made even our shabby flat look golden. Sometimes rescue went both ways. Sometimes saving someone else meant giving yourself permission to be saved too. The kidnapping attempt made headlines within 48 hours. Someone had talked, or security footage had leaked, and suddenly, tech CEO Klara Vogt attacked, dominated business news. The media circus descended, but worse than the press was the internal response from Vogt Technologies board. Klara called me 3 days after the incident, her voice tight with stress. "Jonas, can you come to the office? I need someone who isn't part of this world." I shouldn't have gone. I had taxi shifts, bills to consider, a daughter to pick up from school. But something in Klara's voice made me find coverage for my shift and ask a neighbor to collect Lena. The Vogt Technologies headquarters was everything I'd expected. Glass, steel, unnecessary marble. I felt profoundly out of place in my worn jacket and patched shoes. Klara met me in the lobby looking exhausted. "The board is meeting. They're discussing a motion of no confidence because I created a security liability." "You were attacked. How is that your fault?" "In their world, being a victim is a weakness." She paused. "Heinrich is in there, my father. He's leading the discussion." The conference room was full of men in suits worth more than I'd make in 6 months, and one woman who looked like she ate subordinates for breakfast. Heinrich Vogt sat at the head, 70, silver-haired, radiating the kind of power that came from decades of being obeyed without question. "Klara," he said, not standing, "you've brought a guest." "Jonas Müller, he saved my life." Heinrich's gaze flicked over me, assessing, dismissing. "How fortunate. However, this is a board matter." "He stays," Klara said, with more strength than I'd heard from her before. The meeting was brutal. Board members discussed Klara like she was a liability on a balance sheet, not a human being who'd survived an attack. "The kidnapping attempt demonstrates weakness," one man argued. "It invites further attempts, shows our competitors we have vulnerable points." "Perhaps if Klara weren't so visible, so outspoken about changing company culture," another added, "she wouldn't attract this kind of attention." I watched Klara shrink with each comment, watched her adoptive father say nothing in her defense. Finally, Heinrich spoke. "Klara, you've brought unwelcome attention to this company. Perhaps it's time to consider stepping back from public-facing responsibilities." "You mean stepping down," Klara said quietly. "I mean protecting the company from your vulnerabilities." I'd promised myself I'd stay silent. This wasn't my world, wasn't my fight. But watching them blame her for being attacked, watching this man who called himself her father fail to defend her. "She's your daughter," I said, my voice carrying across the silent room. "Not a contract term to be negotiated away." Heinrich turned his cold gaze on me. "And you are a taxi driver with holes in his shoes who thinks he understands corporate governance. I understand that money hasn't made any of you decent human beings." The room went ice cold. A board member moved toward me threateningly. But I'd grown up in neighborhoods where real threats came from, and this was theater. Klara stood up. "I won't step down. I built half of what this company is now. My vision, my work, my risk." "You're being emotional," Heinrich said. "Exactly the kind of weakness." "That saved her life," I interrupted. "Her weakness of walking alone, of living like a human instead of hiding behind security. That's not weakness. It's courage, more than anyone in this room has shown." A board member actually put his hand on Klara's shoulder, not comforting, controlling. "Perhaps you need time to reconsider." I was across the room before I decided to move, positioning myself between him and Klara. "Touch her again," I said quietly. and find out what a taxi driver from Kreuzberg learned about protecting what matters. He backed off quickly. Board members whispered, shocked that someone had physically intervened. Klara looked at me with something I couldn't name. Gratitude, yes, but also recognition. She'd been surrounded by people with all the resources in the world, and none of them had stood up for her like a broke taxi driver just had. After the room emptied, board members retreating to reassess, Heinrich leaving with a final disapproving glare, Klara broke down. I have nothing, she said. They're going to push me out. Everything I've built, everything I've worked for. I thought about my wife, about the hospital that wouldn't treat her adequately because our insurance wasn't enough, about holding Lena while explaining that Mama wasn't coming home. I lost my wife, I told Klara, because poverty meant her cancer was caught too late, treated too cheaply. I know what it means to have nothing, but you have something they can't take. You have yourself, your integrity, your courage. She was crying now, and I did something probably inappropriate for our relationship but entirely human. I held her while she shook with the release of years of pressure. Lena's plastic bead necklace was in my pocket. She'd made it for me to keep Papa safe while driving taxi. I pulled it out now, offering it to Klara. It's not worth anything in money, I said, but it's real. It's made with love. And right now, I think you need something real more than something valuable. Klara took the cheap necklace with trembling hands, clutching it like a lifeline. Why are you helping me? She whispered. You have your own struggles. You don't need mine. Because Lena is watching how I treat people who need help. Because I know what it's like to feel completely alone. And because right now, you need someone to stand with you, and I can do that even if I can't do much else. Through the conference room windows, Berlin sprawled below us, a city of millions, each with their own struggles, their own stories of survival. I'm going to refuse to step down, Klara said finally, standing straighter. They'll make my life hell. The press will be worse, but I'm done being grateful for being chosen. I'm going to choose myself. Then I'll be there when you do it, I promised. She looked at me, really looked, seeing not the taxi driver or the engineer who'd lost everything, but Jonas, just Jonas. You're the first person in years who's treated me like a human being instead of an asset or a threat. You deserve better than what you've been getting. Outside, the sun was setting over Berlin, painting the glass buildings gold. Inside, we stood together, mismatched, improbable, but somehow exactly what each other needed. Klara didn't step down. She did something better. She stepped back, took a leave of absence, and gave herself permission to figure out who she was beyond Heinrich Vogt's protege. She appeared at our flat more frequently. At first, I worried about imposing or creating obligation, but Lena settled it with characteristic directness. Papa, Clara's lonely. We have extra loneliness space here. She should use it. So Klara became part of our strange little routine. She'd arrive with groceries, at first expensive items that showed she didn't understand our budget, but gradually learning what we actually needed. Is the cheap butter really that different? She asked one day at the discount grocery. It's butter, I said. It makes bread less dry. That's all that matters. She started helping with household repairs our landlord ignored. Watching a CEO struggle to fix a leaky pipe was oddly endearing. Her business strategy mind trying to logic out plumbing. There should be a clear system, she muttered, wrench in hand, expensive blouse already stained. It's plumbing. It defies logic out of spite. Lena thought this was hilarious. Klara, you're smart at business but silly at pipes. I'm learning, Klara said, not offended. Your father is teaching me useful things my education skipped. We fell into unexpected patterns. Weekend mornings at the Kreuzberg market, where Klara marveled at haggling and fresh bread that cost euros instead of the fancy bakery's €20 artisanal loaves. This tastes better, she admitted, eating a simple pretzel. Less expensive doesn't mean less valuable, I said. Just means different priorities. She started discovering parts of herself Heinrich's training had buried. Klara had skilled hands, not for business deals, but for creating things. She took to origami quickly, her precise mind mastering the folds. I wanted to study art, she admitted one evening while we folded cranes with Lena. Before Heinrich found me, in the orphanage I drew constantly, but he said art wasn't practical for his heir. It's not too late, I said. I'm 32. I've spent 22 years in business. And you could spend the next 40 doing what you actually love. The paper crane I dropped that first night sat framed on our shelf now. Klara had insisted. She said it reminded her that fragile things survived if handled with care. One afternoon, we planted sunflowers in pots on our small balcony, space I'd let go neglected after my wife died because tending growing things felt wrong when I couldn't save her. Will they really grow here? Lena asked doubtfully, looking at our grimy urban balcony. If we take care of them, Klara said, with the conviction of someone just learning to believe in growth. The three of us knelt in the dirt together, CEO, taxi driver, 7-year-old, getting our hands dirty, creating something from nothing. Lena, never one for subtlety, asked, Klara, do you want to stay forever? Because Papa says family is who shows up, and you show up a lot. Klara looked at me over Lena's head, uncertainty and hope mixing on her face. If I'm not ready yet, can we wait? She asked carefully. We're good at waiting, I assured her. We've had practice. But then the tabloids found us. Someone photographed the three of us at the market. Klara without makeup and jeans laughing at something Lena said. Failed CEO leeches off struggling father, read one headline. Gold digger single dad traps fallen tech star, read another. I'd expected it would hurt me. Reputation I didn't have getting worse. I hadn't expected how much it would hurt watching Klara read the articles, seeing her face close off with shame and doubt. I should go, she said, after the third article appeared. I'm making your life harder. Lena doesn't deserve this attention. What Lena deserves, I said firmly, is to see adults who don't run away when things get difficult. She's already lost one parent who left. I won't teach her that people disappear when they're inconvenient. Klara looked at me with tears in her eyes. But I am making things worse. They're right. I have nothing now. No job. No money of my own that Heinrich doesn't control. I'm just nothing. You're not nothing. You're Klara, the woman who survived a kidnapping and stood up to a corporate board. The woman who learned to fix plumbing and fold origami and grow sunflowers on a Kreuzberg balcony. That's not nothing. The paper crane in its frame caught afternoon light, casting unexpected shadows. Sometimes the smallest things created the biggest impact. I'd learned that from poverty, from Lena, from the way €3 could mean eating or not. Don't let them take this from you, I said. From us, we've built something real here. Something that matters more than headlines or money or what Heinrich Vogt thinks success should look like. Klara picked up one of the sunflower seedlings, its leaves still tender and uncertain, but reaching toward light. I've never had something real before, she whispered. I don't want to lose it. Then don't leave, I said simply. Stay. Choose this. Choose us. Outside our window, Berlin lived its ordinary, extraordinary life. Millions of small stories, each one mattering, each one real. And in our small flat, a CEO learned that sometimes the biggest success was the smallest victory, finding a place where you belonged exactly as you were. 3 months after that rain-soaked night, Lena woke early and created something that would change everything. I found her at the kitchen table, coloring supplies scattered around a drawing of 3 stick figures holding hands in front of our building, sunflowers blooming on the balcony. Above the drawing, in her careful 7-year-old handwriting, Meine Familie, my family. Who's this for? I asked, though I knew. All of us. But especially Klara, so she knows. When Klara arrived that morning, she had a key now, came and went like she'd always lived here. Lena presented the drawing solemnly. Klara stared at it, tears forming immediately. Lena, are you sure? Including me? You're here every day. You help with homework. You make Papa smile different than he smiled before. That's what families do. Klara looked at me over the drawing, asking a question with her eyes. I'd been poor my entire adult life. I'd lost my wife to a healthcare system that valued profit over people. I drove taxi 12-hour shifts and still couldn't always afford fruit for my daughter. But I'd also learned what actually mattered. And what mattered was standing in my shabby kitchen, watching a lonely CEO cry over a child's crayon drawing, knowing that family had nothing to do with blood or money and everything to do with showing up. "If you want to stay," I said, "stay, if you're ready." Klara set down the drawing with trembling hands. "I got a job offer yesterday. Small design firm. They want me to teach business strategy, but also they'd let me take art classes, learn what I never got to learn." "That's wonderful. It pays nothing compared to CEO salary. Barely more than..." She gestured at our modest flat, the visible poverty we lived in. "Then this," I finished. "Klara, this isn't a failure. This is love and sunflowers and origami. This is Lena having two people who show up for her. This is enough. But I'd be one of us," I said. "Poor, struggling, worried about €3 decisions, but free, actually free to be yourself." Klara looked around our small kitchen. Chipped plates, mismatched cups, the sunflowers visible through the window now blooming improbably gold. "I want to stay," she whispered. "If there's room, if you'll have me." Lena hugged her immediately. "We always have room. Papa says love expands to fit the space, not the other way around." "Did I say that?" I asked. "You said it when Mama left. You said even though she was gone, there was more love, not less. Because you chose to fill the empty spots." I pulled both of them close. My daughter and this unlikely woman who'd become essential to our lives through a series of accidents that felt increasingly like fate. "Welcome home, Klara." Through our window, morning light hit the sunflowers Klara and Lena had planted, golden faces turned toward brightness, thriving in the most unlikely places. Some flowers needed perfect conditions. Others just needed someone to believe they could grow. And sometimes the richest life was the one you built from nothing, with people who saw you clearly and chose you anyway. Holes in your shoes, poverty in your pockets, but love overflowing in every small, ordinary, perfect moment. If you see yourself somewhere in this story, subscribe to HA Stories and leave a question you'd like to be healed. If you found yourself in this story, subscribe HA Stories.